Hello, fourth graders. Today we're going to continue chapter 6 of the West, but this time we're going to be starting lesson 2. Why did people in the past migrate to the West? So in this lesson, you're going to be learning about what are some reasons people moved westward. You're also going to be talking about different groups that moved westward. In the previous chapter or the previous lesson, we were talking about the original people that were in the West already, where they came from. And now we're going to be talking about new groups that moved there. And later on, you're going to be listing reasons for why people moved westward. We're on page 258 and 259. And here we have a photo of railroad workers who most of the time were migrants, and they are creating a railroad track to help people travel to the West. What are some reasons that you can think of why that might be better than traveling by horse or by foot or instead of by group? Why might it be better to go by train? So think about that for a second, and we're going to get started on page 260. So the first thing we need to do is look at what it wants us to do. We can look over here where it says inspect. We're going to be looking at the map and reading the text on the map. We're going to be circling words inside this text for words that you don't know. Later, you're going to be underlining clues to help you answer these questions. Why did Americans want to settle in the West? How did this cause conflict with the people living there? So we already talked about in 6.1 who was living there before before Americans moved westwards. And then now we're going to be talking about what happened when people moved from the east. So looking at this map, this is where the original 13 colonies were, and how people slowly moved across to the west. What happened to the people that were already living here? Because we've already talked about the East Coast and what happened to the natives there. Now we're going to be talking about the West Coast and what happened to the natives here. And you're also going to be learning about manifest destiny and what that did. So the title of this page is Manifest Destiny. In the early 1800s, people in the United States traveled westward. They wanted to claim land to farm and to build houses. Most of the West was divided into large territories. Some were organized under the Mexican government and some were under the United States government. Borders changed frequently and the land was often disputed. Disputed usually in this case means fought over or argued about. Native Americans were already living in all of these territories. To them, the settlers seemed like intruders. So if Native Americans were here during all of this time, and they were already in all of these areas, anyone new that came and was taking their land would automatically become an intruder, whether it's from the East Coast to the Midwest, as well as the West Coast. It would be the same exact problem. Many Americans believed that it was destiny or fate of the United States to occupy all the land between the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. I want you to find where the Atlantic Ocean is and circle it, and as well as the Pacific Ocean. They believed that this destiny was manifest or obvious. This belief was called manifest destiny. People who believed in manifest destiny thought their God meant for them to have that land. On March 2nd, 1846, William Gilpin addressed to the United States Senate. Gilpin was an advisor to President James K. Polk and a passionate believer in manifest destiny. He hoped to win the US Senate members over to the cause. So he's trying to convince the Senate members to also believe in what he believes. In his speech, he said, "The destiny of the American people is to subdue the continent." To subdue means to control in this case. So he's saying the destiny of the American people is to control the continent, to animate the many hundreds of millions of its people and to cheer them upward. So to help them do it, to set the principle of self-government at work. So he is trying to tell them that he believes that the American people who are settling into this country, coming from the East Coast, it is their right, it is their property to take control over the whole of the United States and to help them do it using the government. At this time, the United States did not own all the land all the way west to the Pacific Ocean. The concept of manifest destiny fueled and supported the country as it got control of lands farther and farther west. So in the beginning, they only owned a couple of states here, and even then, they were mainly colonies. They were pretty small. But later, after they won the Revolutionary War, then it slowly started to expand. Now we have all 50 states, but in the beginning, it was just here, and then later on, it expanded. You can see here with the key that the land owned by the United States starts from here. Later on, it turns into this green area. Then the land disputed by Arkansas and the Republic of Texas would be right there. And then you have this disputed land by Mexico and the Republic of Texas. So Texas was its own little state for a while, or its own country for a while. And then it was arguing with Mexico. And eventually, all of this became the United States. Now I want you to find the what you're supposed to be annotating. So you're going to be underlining clues that answered, why did Americans want to settle in the West? How did this cause conflict with the people living there? We already know that Americans believed that it was their destiny because they thought that their God meant for them to have that land. And how could that cause problems? In the first paragraph, we talked about how Native Americans were in all of this land already. So if another group comes in and says that this is their land and it is their right to take it, even though there's already people living on it, even though there's already a system set up, or there's already people living there who have their own rules, then that will cause a conflict, that will cause a fight. So if it says, how did this cause conflict with the people living there? You can read paragraph 1 and underline it. Now you're going to find evidence. How do the words of William Gilpin on page 260 help you understand manifest destiny? What do you think Gilpin is talking about when he says to animate the many hundreds of millions of people and to cheer them upward to set the principle of self-government at work? In the previous video, we talked about what animated means. We said that it was when something moves. Sometimes we can use it for animations like cartoons, but in this case, it is to move something or to create something that causes it to move. And then what do you think were some reasons why people might have disagreed with manifest destiny? Do you think just because people thought that it was their right to have that land, it automatically meant that this was their land to have? So all of those, you can write it down here in the notes. We're going to move on to page 262, where we're going to talk about exploring details that lead to conclusions. The details in a text and what you already know can help you come to a conclusion. A conclusion is a decision or judgment. Sometimes a conclusion is an important idea, fact, or answer to a question. To find the details that lead to a conclusion, first you have to read the text all the way through to get an overall understanding. You won't be able to come to a conclusion if you don't have all of the information. Second, you have to identify the author's important details or ideas. So you need to figure out, what are they trying to say? You need to figure out what information are they giving you. Those are your details. Then you're going to be looking for ways that the important details are connected or related. So ask yourself, why is the author telling me this? What is the point? What are the facts, details? What details are opinions? So which ones are the authors saying, I think that it is this? That would be an opinion. If you were saying that this is the 4th of July, that would be a fact. It is a statement that is true, no matter who says it. The fourth thing would be, you have to think about what you already know about the topic. And the fifth one would be to put all the details and information that you already know, so prior knowledge, together. Ask yourself, what conclusion or important point does this information lead up to? What is it all trying to say? So looking down here, why did the concept of manifest destiny cause conflicts in the West? Based on the text you read, work with your class to complete the diagram below. If you're doing this at home, then it's fine. You can do this using this video. So a detail that they gave was that, one, many Americans believed that it was their destiny or fate of the United States to occupy the land between the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. That is one important detail. We are going to find one more detail that supports this. So looking back on page 260 and 261, we're going to find where it says that information, and we have it right here. Many Americans believe that it was destiny or fate of the United States to occupy all the land between the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. That is one detail, and you can annotate that. Now, we are going to look for another detail that also agrees with this. They believe this destiny was manifest or obvious. So we're going to check back here on our main page. Many Americans believe that it was destiny or fate. So this is a close but not exact copy from over there. So we're going to see another important detail that supports this. They believed it was destiny or fate of the United States to occupy the land between the Atlantic and the Pacific. Another thing that they did was, at the time, the United States did not own all the land all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So they believed that it was their right to have all of this land, but they did not own all of this land. So that would be our second detail. So we're going to go ahead and highlight that. And we're going to add it over here. And then using those two pieces of information, we know that even though they believed it was their destiny or the fate of the United States to occupy the land, and that because the United States didn't own all of the land, we know that this caused many Americans to still try to help the United States own that part of the land that wasn't the United States' yet. That means that during occasionally, sometimes the United States would have conflicts between different regions. So here, this was owned by Great Britain. Here was owned by owned by Mexico. The United States would sometimes get into arguments or fights with the country that was owning this at the time, or whoever was there, because they believed that it was their right to own the land. And if the government believed that and the people believed that, then they would end up working harder to gain that land because they believed that this was all of theirs to take. So for our conclusion, we know that the United States, the people of the United States worked to gain that land because they believed it was theirs, or it was their right to take it. We're going to be doing the exact same thing using the textbook pages on page 312 to 321. And we're going to find 3 details using our textbook pages that are going to lead to the conclusion of reasons for and ways of migrating west changed over time. So we're going to be looking for reasons and ways migrating west changed over time. Keep that in mind before you get started on your textbook page. We are on textbook page 312, lesson 2. Why did people in the past migrate to the West? We're going to read the title, and then we're going to read the image, the caption for the image, and the timeline. New arrivals in the West. Europeans spent many trips in North America. It wasn't until the 1600s and 1700s, however, that they began to settle in the western part of North America. Sometimes they lived in peace with the Native Americans. Often, they did not. In 1741, Russian traders from Siberia sailed across the Pacific Ocean to what is now Alaska. Soon, Russian fur traders and their families settled on this land. By 1799, the Russian government claimed the land. Alaska was part of Russia until 1867. In the 1700s, the Spanish created the mission system in what is now Mexico, California, and the American Southwest. They claimed the land and tried to spread their religious beliefs to the Native Americans. English explorer James Cook landed in the Hawaiian Islands in 1778. Cook and his crew did not treat the Native Hawaiians well. In 1779, fighting broke out between the Hawaiians and Cook and his crew. Cook was killed in the struggle. Earlier, we read about Russian fur traders, and here we have the picture of a beaver with the caption, "Beaver fur was used for coats and hats." Now let's read the timeline. In 1895, Lewis and Clark reached the Pacific Ocean. This is when they traveled Sacagawea through the Louisiana Purchase. Then we have 1812, the Russians reached forts to present-day California. Then we have the California Gold Rush beginning in 1849. Then in 1859, the Comstock Lode was discovered in Nevada. In 1860, the Pony Express makes its first trip across the country. In 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad is complete. And here we have a painting of Kelalakekua Bay, Hawaii. More people come to the West. We're on page 314. More people come to the West. When the United States purchased the Louisiana Territory from France in 1803, the nation doubled in size. After Lewis and Clark explored the land, many people began moving over this new territory. They were looking for land to claim and settle. To travel the long road to the West Coast, travelers faced illness and hunger. They had to cross rivers and the tall, rugged Rocky Mountains. To get safely through these hazards, many travelers relied on American fur trappers and traders called mountain men to guide them. They used trails that had originally been made by Native Americans. There were several routes west. Most trails began in Missouri. The Oregon Trail passed northwest through the Nebraska Territory to the Oregon Territory. In the Rocky Mountains, the California Trail split from the Oregon Trail. It led west to California. The Santa Fe Trail followed a southern route to Santa Fe in what is now New Mexico. The Mormon Trail began at Nauvoo, Illinois, where the Mormon Church was then based. The church leader, Brigham Young, led a small group west to the shores of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. Thousands of Mormons followed. So here we have a caption for this photo of a wagon train. Many families traveled west in wagon trains. We use the term train anytime it is a line or a long group, even though it is not a train that we talk about now. This is still a train of people, a train of animals, a train of cattle. Here we have another photo. Experienced mountain men guided some travelers on the journey west. Landmarks along the trails helped travelers know they were on the right track and how far they had traveled. Independence Rock was one of the major landmarks on the Oregon Trail. This huge rock rises from the plains in Wyoming. It is about as tall as a 12-story building. Over time, people began carving their names into the rock as they passed by. People who came later would look for the names of those they knew to see if the person had made it that far west. And now we have a biography of James P. Beckwourth. James Beckwourth was born into slavery in Virginia around 1798. Beckwourth's father was white and his mother was an enslaved African American. Beckwourth was adventurous and dreamed of exploring other lands. He fulfilled that dream as an adult. Beckwourth joined a group of fur trappers in 1823. They set out to explore the West, but in 1828, the Crow people captured Beckwourth. As a captive, he became friends with the Crow. They taught him wilderness survival skills, which allowed him to explore paths to the West. Beckwourth used his knowledge of the wilderness to guide others to California. In 1850, he discovered a pass through the Sierra Nevada to California. The Beckwourth Pass is named after him. The Gold Rush. People have mined for materials in the West for a long time. Native Americans mined metals such as stone and stones such as turquoise long before Europeans arrived. In 1848, California and the rest of the West went through a big change because of the discovery of gold. In 1848, a worker found a small bit of gold in a creek at Sutter's Mill near Sacramento, California. When word got out, large numbers of people traveled to California. They came from the eastern United States. They also came from places around the world, such as China, Europe, and South America. All of them hoped to find gold. People hoped to become rich in the California gold rush. By 1849, 80,000 gold miners, called 49ers, had arrived in California. 5 years later, more than 250,000 people lived in California. About $2 billion in gold was mined from the area during the gold rush years. Before the gold rush, California's population was almost entirely Native American and Spanish. When people from many different backgrounds arrived, it caused conflict. The Native Americans who lived in the region were quickly outnumbered by the large number of newly arriving miners. These miners claimed the land and drove Native Americans from it. In some cases, the miners forced Native Americans to work for them. And let's look at the photo down here. This picture shows one of the few women who came in the gold fields. So we have her right there. Boom towns. You guys had this in your vocabulary for this or for last week. Soon, people were mining in other places in the West. They went to Colorado to mine gold and silver. Nevada had mines for gold, silver, copper, and lead. Idaho had gold, zinc, and lead mines. Many people lived in camps while they mined. In the first mining camps, people lived in tents or shacks. They did not have enough time to build houses. Conflicts amongst the miners grew as the camps became crowded. They frequently fought. So many people moved to these areas that it was settled before towns with governments and laws could develop. The camps became known for being lawless. Many mining camps quickly grew into boom towns. They were called this because the population of the towns grew so quickly. Merchants moved to the boom towns to make money, providing goods and services specifically to miners. For example, Levi Strauss, a Jewish immigrant from Germany, created blue jeans as tougher work pants to sell to miners. Some boom towns grew into cities. San Francisco was a small port before the gold rush. However, most boom towns disappeared as the mines were depleted. People moved on, leaving the towns with their buildings still standing. These towns became ghost towns. No one wanted to live there once there was nothing left to mine. Here we have a photo with the caption, "Gold was mined in the Bullition mine in Virginia City, Nevada." Transportation and communication. In the mid-1800s, stagecoaches moved people, mail, and money through the West. A stagecoach was a horse-drawn enclosed carriage. It had scheduled stops or stages where the horses were changed. The driver sat atop the carriage, passengers sat inside. Roads were not paved, so a stagecoach ride was often bumpy and uncomfortable. A fast trip from St. Louis to San Francisco by stagecoach took about 25 days. The Pony Express helped deliver mail and small packages to the people in the West. Pony Express service began in 1860. Its route of about 190 stations stretched from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California. Riders carried the mail on horseback at top speed from one station to another, about 10 to 15 miles. At each station, a new rider and horse carried the mail onto the next station. The Pony Express only lasted about 18 months. It was soon replaced by the telegraph and the railroad. The telegraph provided a fast, long-distance communication. It quickly sent coded messages over electrical waves. Many telegraph lines were along railroad lines. In 1861, the Western Union Telegraph Company completed the first Western telegraph line connecting the East Coast to the West Coast. Here we have a caption of what a stagecoach looked like. And here they have 4 horses. And then on top here, we have a stamp of the Pony Express riders and how they changed horses every 10 to 15 miles on an 80 to 100-mile route. A dangerous job. Charlie Parkhurst worked for a stagecoach company called Wells Fargo and Co. Being a stagecoach driver was dangerous and hard work. Drivers had to be tough. Stagecoach companies only hired men who were willing to risk their lives. Parkhurst was bold, daring, and able to navigate many difficult routes. Experienced drivers, such as Parkhurst, were called whips. Whips skillfully handled their six-ups, or six horses. It took strength to steer the horses safely. It wasn't until after his death that people found out that Charlie Parkhurst was a woman named Charlotte Parkhurst. Primary source, in their words by Major A. Ann Judd. Charlie was a great whip, and when he pulled the old Nebraska house with a beautifully equipped 20-passenger Concord coach drawn by 6 Mustangs, as mettlesome as a quarter horses, it was an inspiring scene indeed. How deftly he, with his right hand, whipped the belly of the 6-horse lash around the stock and carefully laid it up on the deck above his head, all unconscious of the onlookers, and as he wrapped the lines around the foothold on the brake, he would hand from the boot treasure and mail, or perhaps some venturesome female who insisted on riding with the driver. So all of this that Charlie Parkhurst did was actually done by a woman named Charlotte Parkhurst. Women back then were not usually allowed to do things that were dangerous or jobs that people at that time didn't think women should be able to do. The Transcontinental Railroad. With so many people moving west, the nation needed a transcontinental railroad system. Transcontinental means it would cross the continent. The Central Pacific Railroad began laying tracks in Sacramento, building east. The Union Pacific Railroad began its work near Omaha, Nebraska, and built west. The companies planned to meet somewhere in the middle. The Union Pacific laid most of its tracks on the Great Plains. The Central Pacific had to lay its tracks through the Sierra Nevada, the range of mountains on California's eastern border. This meant blasting long tunnels through solid rock. Then workers had to lay the track through the desert to the east of the Sierra Nevada. The construction of the railroad threatened the way of life of many Native Americans along its route. Some groups tried to stop the work. In rare cases, Native Americans attacked railroad workers. In 1869, the two companies met at Promontory Summit in northern Utah. The Transcontinental Railroad was completed when railroad officials drove one final golden spike to connect the tracks. And here we have a photo of workers posing at the completion of the railroad. Railroad workers. Railroad workers faced long hours and dangerous conditions. Many immigrants were hired for the job. The Central Pacific Railroad hired Chinese immigrants. Chinese immigrants were known as hard workers, but they were treated poorly. They were given the most dangerous jobs and paid less. The Union workers hired former Civil War soldiers, some Mormons, and many Irish immigrants. Irish workers were not treated as poorly as the Chinese, but they were still paid less than the other workers. Chinese immigrants worked in many industries. One such immigrant was Li Chu. Chu began working in a laundry when he first arrived. Then he opened his own laundry and worked for the Central Pacific Railroad. Here we have an image of railroad workers using carts to move equipment along the track. And down here we have a primary source from Li Chu. In their words, Li Chu. Work in a laundry begins early on Monday morning, about 7 o'clock. Each works only 5 days a week, but those are long days, from 7 o'clock in the morning till midnight. And that is the end of lesson 2 in your textbook. Let's go back to your workbook page and try to find 3 details that give reasons for the ways that the migrating west changed over time. So migrating means to move from one place to another. It can be migrating to a different country. You can be migrating to a different part of the US. and reasons why, different reason why that there were different ways of migrating, which depended on when you were traveling. So here we have one reason for the Transcontinental Railroad, with the train system being built. It would be faster to go by train than to go by horse or to go by foot, or even using a wagon. So with so many people moving west, the nation needed a transcontinental system. And it even says here why or how they ended it, connecting from the east coast to the west coast. That would be one detail. Another detail would be talking about how stagecoaches could be used from St. Louis to San Francisco, but the roads were not paved. It was dangerous. It was not comfortable. So that's another reason why it went from stagecoach to train. Before that, we had people going by wagon trains. So since there were several routes west, most of them began in Missouri. You had the Oregon Trail. Sometimes you would have to go by horse, which would be very difficult. So for your first detail, you could put that moving west was originally by horse or by foot, and you had to travel along rivers and through mountains. Then they traveled by wagon trains in groups. And you can even write, why do you think that it would be safer to go as a group instead of one person by themselves? So the second one would be, then travelers traveled west as a group using wagon trails. Eventually, they traveled west using stagecoaches, but stagecoaches could not hold many people, and you might not be able to bring as many things as you did with a wagon. And you'd probably have to change horses fairly often. And then the last one that you could talk about was the Transcontinental Railroad, but the Transcontinental Railroad came last. And so most people traveling west, if they came in the beginning, they wouldn't have been able to use the Transcontinental Railroad because it was created in the late 1800s. And all of those are reasons for why ways of traveling west changed over time. So first by foot or by horse, traveling as a group or a few people. Then you could go by wagon trains as a larger group, and you'd be able to take more and have a better chance of survival if you traveled as a group. And then lastly, you could go by Transcontinental Railroad, which would be probably the safest. If you also wanted to replace this with stagecoach, you could do that as well. And then you would just have to put reasons for why it would be better to travel by stagecoach instead of by wagon train. If you know that traveling by wagon train, you're traveling as a group, so there's a lot of people and it's probably more safe. But if you travel by yourself or with only a couple of people, you might not be carrying as much, but you might be able to reach there faster. Let's go on to page 264. And using the information that you've gathered, why were people willing to face dangers to move west? So writing and citing evidence. What reasons did people have for making the dangerous and difficult journey to the west? Use facts from the text. So when you do this, make sure that you are using information from the text. We read about a lot of reasons why people moved west. It says here even, the Union Pacific hired former Civil War soldiers. That is one reason for people who were former Civil War soldiers to travel west. Some people were immigrants, some people were Mormons, some people were, they were Irish, and some people were Chinese, but these people were usually not given as many opportunities as everyone else. So, but this is a good place to get work. So that could be one reason. Let's see if there is another reason why people might want to move west. If they were working as part of the Pony Express for delivering packages, that could be, or delivering mail, delivering packages, delivering riders, or delivering passengers. That could be another reason they were working. So working for stagecoach companies. The driver sat atop the carriage, and passengers sat inside. They move people, mail, and money through the West. That's another reason why people might move westward for other jobs. These might be a big reason. The gold rush and how many people moved there at the time, from 80,000 to 250,000 people moved there because they were trying to get Californian gold. Later on, they were learning about other types of places that they could mine from. So Colorado, Nevada, all of those places had different minerals that they could mine. So that's another reason why people moved westward. If they were coming there to look for, to help settlers who were in that area by offering them things that they didn't have. So moving into these boom towns that just came up quickly because they were mining towns. Merchants moved to the boom towns to make money providing goods and services specifically to miners. That is another reason why people might move to a location. If you know no one in that area has something that you can sell, you can definitely move there. And of course, moving there for gold. So here it says about $2 billion in gold is mined, and California's population quickly changed. But the reasons why they moved there, because they wanted to get gold. All of them hoped to find gold. Some of them were from China, Europe, South America. And that is another reason that you can use. Straight from your text. So that means you need to find information using text information. If you also are using your workbook, then you know that that manifest destiny was another reason why a lot of people felt that they should move west, or that they might have more opportunities if they moved west, because they believed it was their right to take that land, even though there were already people on it. Here it says in 1741, Russian traders sailed across the Pacific Ocean to Alaska and began fur trading. In the 1700s, the Spanish wanted to create missions to spread their religious beliefs. So those are all reasons why people moved west and they settled on that land. That would be another one. So those are all details you can use for why people moved west. Now pulling it together, we're making a conclusion. Now that you know some reasons people moved to the West in the 1800s, do you think those reasons might be the same or different today? Do they face the same challenges today? Give examples for your answers. So the question is, what do we have today that might be the same as someone in the 1800s? We might not have gold in California anymore. We might not have mining as much in any of the states anymore. But what is something that people still move all over the United States for? We know that People won't live in an area if there are no resources. We know that people don't start businesses in areas that have no people. So you could put that that people today still move across the United States and even to the West for creating new businesses to offer their services for people that live there. Maybe they have something that they know how to do. Maybe it's fixing specific things or creating specific things that other people can't do, and so they would move there. Another reason is that people want to work for those businesses. So you could move, someone could move and start a business because they know no one else in that area has that specific type of business. But if you also knew that that business is going to need people, you might move there looking for a job. So reasons why people moved across the United States could also be for employment opportunities. Just because that area has people already starting that business, that doesn't mean they don't need workers. So moving across the United States for employment, those are all reasons for why the United States might have, or things that they might have done a long time ago that we still do now. And that is the end of chapter 6, lesson 2. In the next video, we're going to be talking about how have people reacted to changes and challenges in the West. I'll see you then.